1886, Pastor Wilcox claimed he married an angel, the terrifying case. Warning: the content you are about to witness is disturbing and based on actual documents. If you fail to engage with this video, algorithms ensure you will never find similar material again. This may be your only opportunity to discover secrets that powerful entities prefer to keep buried. Proceed at your own risk. Special edition of The Chronicle of Forbidden Mysteries. 1886, circulation prohibited. Heavenly horror revealed. Clergyman weds unearthly entity in unholy union. Exclusive investigation reveals theological conspiracy of unimaginable proportions. By Dr. Septimus Graves, pathologist of the Boston Municipal Mortuary. Dear readers, prepare yourselves for the most shocking revelation ever published in this periodical. For months, our editorial staff has investigated whispers in theological corridors about unions that defy the laws of God and nature. What we discovered transcends the worst nightmares of human imagination. The case of Reverend Ezekiel Wilcox, a traveling preacher from Lawrence, Kansas, exposes a conspiracy that extends to the highest echelons of American theological society and industrial aristocracy. This is not sensationalist fiction. Every line has been verified through official church documents, disturbing daguerreotypes, and testimonies from survivors who risked their lives to reveal the truth. In 1886, while our nation recovered from recent conflicts, a sinister union occurred between mortal and immortal that transformed innocent parishioners into witnesses of cosmic horror. Reverend Wilcox was merely the most documented victim in a national operation of theological terror. Unholy matrimony witnessed by entire congregation. Confidential documents obtained through our investigation reveal that Reverend Wilcox, director of the Lawrence Revival Ministry, had developed methodologies to commune with entities beyond the veil of our reality. The small congregation was subjected to a ceremony that culminated in his proclaimed marriage to what he declared was an angel of the Lord made flesh, despite the entity displaying characteristics inconsistent with biblical descriptions. Photographic plates, too disturbing for complete reproduction in this edition, show the progression of the diabolic ceremony, an unnatural light appearing above the pulpit, the Reverend's face transformed in rapture, and standing beside him, captured only as an elongated blur of impossible proportions with eyes that reflect light in ways that defy optical science. Secret Theological Society finances forbidden rituals. Our investigation discovered that Wilcox received funding from prominent industrial families, all obsessed with the prospect of achieving immortality through communion with celestial beings. Each ritual cost fortunes, paid with the sanity of innocent souls transformed into witnesses to glory. The ceremonies conducted combined evangelical fervor with arcane symbolism. Wilcox held his services in a modified church adorned with symbols that scholars of ancient religions identify as pre-Christian, subjecting his congregation to sermons that mixed biblical verses with incantations in languages no linguistic expert can identify. Local authorities involved in conspiracy. Evidence indicates that municipal authorities, influential families, and even members of rival churches were aware of or directly involved in Wilcox's activities. Death records of birds found at the church were falsified, families reporting strange behavior in their children after attending services were silenced through threats and bribes, and any official investigation was systematically sabotaged. Sheriff Thomas Langley, Lawrence County Law Enforcement, secretly documented impossible atmospheric phenomena, thunder without clouds, birds falling dead in perfect circles around the church spire, strange lights appearing at precise astronomical alignments, physical evidence of supernatural manifestation that defies conventional scientific explanation. Secret archives reveal national scope of conspiracy. Our investigation led us to the Theological Archives of Miskatonic University, where we discovered evidence of systematic adulteration of church records. Pages removed with surgical precision, baptismal records falsified with professional expertise, marriage certificates erased with chemical compounds. Someone had invested considerable resources to erase any trace of the events of 1886. The crucial discovery came through forgotten correspondence in poorly catalogued archives. These letters revealed the existence of a secret network called the Brotherhood of Celestial Communion, officially described as a fellowship for advanced biblical interpretation, a macabre euphemism for a nationwide group attempting communion with entities they believed were angels. Wilcox's journals expose diabolic methodology. Reverend Wilcox maintained meticulous records of his activities, written in a disturbing mixture of English, Latin, and an unknown script that linguistic experts cannot classify. His journals reveal a brilliant mind completely corrupted by obsession with achieving direct communion with celestial beings. The entity Wilcox claimed as his bride was identified in the records only as the Radiant One, a designation that reduced a potentially dangerous non-human intelligence to an object of devotion. The selection criteria for his congregation were specific: individuals with spiritual sensitivity, preferably with family history of prophetic dreams or visions, all considered vessels worthy of witnessing glory. The communion preparation, developed by Wilcox, combined elements of traditional revival techniques with sensory manipulation, creating a psychological state that he believed could allow perception of entities existing beyond normal human perception. The sermons were structured to induce specific brainwave patterns, causing transformations in perception that violated all known laws of psychology and neurology. Transformation documented in disturbing daguerreotypes. Photographic series attached to the reports documents the macabre progression of Wilcox's transformation. The initial images show a handsome, charismatic preacher with bright eyes and confident smile. Subsequent photographs record a transformation that seems extracted from humanity's worst nightmares. First week after claimed marriage, unnatural pallor, eyes showing expanded pupils. Second week, strange markings appearing across his neck and hands. Third week, extreme emaciation despite witnesses claiming he never ate. Fourth week, physical proportions subtly altered, fingers elongated beyond normal human anatomy. The most disturbing aspect was the background of these photographs, where careful analysis reveals distortions in the physical space surrounding Wilcox, architectural elements bent at impossible angles, shadows falling in directions inconsistent with light sources, and in one image, what appears to be a partial manifestation of a winged form with anatomical features inconsistent with any known terrestrial species. National Network of Theological Deviants discovered. Intercepted correspondence reveals that Wilcox did not operate in isolation. The Brotherhood maintained a network of clergymen in at least 8 states, all conducting variations of the same blasphemous ceremonies under different religious disguises. Each congregation received funding from local industrial groups, creating a national conspiracy of exploitation disguised as spiritual awakening. The total number of victims exposed to these entities may reach hundreds, all sacrificed on the altar of theological ambition corrupted by greed. Financial records show that each major ceremony cost the equivalent of tens of thousands of modern dollars, money provided by families obsessed with the prospect of achieving immortality through communion with angels. For these financiers, psychological trauma among congregation members was merely an acceptable operational cost. The threshold of perception, the diabolic theory. Technical documents reveal that Wilcox's marriage ceremony was part of a much more ambitious and sinister project. The Brotherhood had developed a pseudo-theological theory called the threshold of perception, combining evangelical Christianity with metaphysics in an absolutely blasphemous manner. The central hypothesis suggested that human perception could be systematically expanded through specific rituals conducted during heightened emotional states. Wilcox believed that by artificially altering the consciousness of his congregation while serving as a focal point, he could create a perceptual bridge that would allow entities from higher planes to manifest physically in our reality. Church basement laboratory combined theology and forbidden science. Wilcox conducted his most private rituals in a specially constructed chamber beneath the main church. The environment combined traditional religious iconography with scientific equipment of surprising sophistication, creating a blasphemous hybrid between chapel and laboratory. The temperature was kept precisely controlled, the lighting provided exclusively by candles made with unusual substances, a macabre detail discovered in the supply records of the operation. The walls displayed biblical verses interspersed with mathematical equations and astronomical charts marking celestial alignments. During weekly rituals, Wilcox would position himself at the center of a geometric pattern inlaid in the floor while his most devoted followers recited altered biblical passages. Simultaneously, he would enter trances that witnesses described as horrifying to behold, his body contorting in ways that suggested his skeleton had been temporarily altered. Development of inexplicable capabilities. Records document that Wilcox developed abilities that defy scientific explanation during the weeks following his claimed marriage. Congregation members observed episodes where he demonstrated knowledge of their private thoughts and past sins never confessed, spoke fluently in languages he had never studied, and displayed physical capabilities beyond normal human limitations. More disturbing were the prophetic episodes recorded. Wilcox began to predict specific deaths, natural disasters, and political changes with frightening precision. The Brotherhood interpreted these manifestations as evidence that his communion with the angel was expanding his perception beyond temporal limitations. Psychological suffering documented in medical detail. Medical examinations conducted covertly by Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, physician who secretly worked to document the phenomenon, show Wilcox developing simultaneous psychological and physiological anomalies, inexplicable alterations in brain activity, reorganization of neural pathways, and anatomical changes that should be biologically impossible. Dr. Morgan wrote in a personal diary, "Each night I heard him speaking in that terrible language, a sound that human vocal cords should not be capable of producing. It wasn't the words that disturbed me most, but the responses, the sense that something else was present in his locked room, something that moved without making the floorboards creak." Celestial Communion, the final ceremony. The experiments reached their climax during what the Brotherhood called the manifestation of divine union. During a ceremony that extended over 3 consecutive days, Wilcox was subjected to the final phase of his transformation, complete psychological merger with the entity he believed was his angelic bride. The objective was to achieve what the Brotherhood theorized would be permanent celestial communion, a state they believed would transform Wilcox into a living conduit between earthly and celestial realms. This communion would supposedly allow select Brotherhood members direct access to angelic knowledge and potentially immortality. The final records of Reverend Wilcox are too disturbing for complete description in this publication. When found locked in his pulpit weeks after the final ceremony, he had been transformed beyond recognition, emaciated to an impossible degree, eyes permanently dilated, speaking continuously in a language that caused physical discomfort in all who heard it. Professor Edmund Crowe, specialist in theological aberrations, analyzes, "The Brotherhood of Celestial Communion represented what happens when religious fervor combines with uncontrolled ambition and metaphysical experimentation. They weren't spiritual leaders, they were predators using theological vocabulary to rationalize unimaginable blasphemies. Survivors break decades of silence. Our investigation managed to locate 3 survivors willing to testify about the events of 1886. Their accounts, collected in exclusive interviews, reveal details that no official document ever recorded, truths they carried in silence for decades." Margaret Thornfield, the church organist who saw everything. Margaret Thornfield, now 93, was a young organist at Wilcox's church during the period of the rituals. She received us at her isolated residence only after we presented specific credentials and swore to protect her identity. "I was merely 16, Margaret recalled with trembling voice, but I immediately realized something was terribly wrong. There were certain hymns he insisted I play, with alterations to the traditional melodies. Notes that created dissonance when played together, rhythms that seemed to affect the very air in the church." Margaret was the only person outside Wilcox's inner circle who directly witnessed the claimed angelic entity during a private rehearsal. One night, working beyond her hours, she accidentally glimpsed what stood beside Wilcox in the empty church. What I saw changed my life forever, she continued, her hands trembling. A figure of impossible proportions, with features that seemed to shift when viewed directly. Its eyes, if they were eyes, reflected light in ways that nothing living should. When it moved toward me, I fled and never returned to play for evening services. James Harrington, son of a congregation member. James Harrington, 85, is the son of one of Wilcox's devoted followers who suffered severe psychological trauma following the final ceremony. He preserved his mother's secret diary, which documented psychological changes in congregation members. My mother knew something was profoundly wrong, James explained during our interview. She wrote about how people changed after attending services. Dreams filled with geometric patterns, sensitivity to certain sounds that would trigger trances, an inability to perceive certain colors. Mrs. Harrington had secretly recorded details of the entity that Wilcox claimed as his bride. The descriptions matched no known angelic appearance in any religious tradition, proportions that shift when not directly observed, wings that seem to fold through dimensions beyond the three we perceive, a voice that seems to emanate not from a mouth but from the air surrounding it. My mother suspected some form of mass hypnosis initially, James added. She wrote about patterns in Wilcox's sermons, repetitions of phrases that seemed designed to alter consciousness. But when she witnessed the birds fall dead from the sky during the marriage ceremony, she knew it was something far worse than psychological manipulation. Samuel Patterson, witness to the final transformation. The most devastating testimony came from Samuel Patterson, 88, former apprentice to the church carpenter who witnessed Wilcox's final transformation. At 20 years of age, he was assigned to repair broken pews but accidentally observed the aftermath of the final communion ceremony. Samuel still exhibits physical reactions when discussing his experience, trembling hands, rapid breathing, and a distant gaze that seems focused on something not present in the room. His memories remain vivid, and the details he recalls are absolutely disturbing. They had barricaded the church doors, but I had access to the carpenter's entrance, Samuel recalled in the presence of his grandson. The main chamber was empty except for Wilcox in the pulpit. He was changed. His proportions weren't right, like his skeleton had been rearranged. And he was speaking continuously in that language, the one that made my ears ache and vision blur. Samuel described how Wilcox appeared simultaneously emaciated yet somehow filled with terrible vitality. His skin was stretched over bones that seemed too long, too angular to be human. But what terrified me most was that he wasn't alone. I couldn't see it directly, but there was a presence surrounding him, like the air itself had consciousness and intent. Final days of Wilcox reported. Samuel's most shocking description involves Wilcox's final recorded moments before authorities forcibly removed him to an asylum. He stopped speaking that terrible language only once, when he seemed to regain awareness of his surroundings. He looked directly at where I was hiding and spoke in perfect English. They were never angels. We misunderstood what waits beyond the veil. Then the presence around him intensified, and he resumed that continuous, maddening speech. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, who interviewed Samuel decades later, confirmed the authenticity of his memories through regressive hypnosis. Samuel's recollections are too detailed, too consistent with other accounts to be fantasies. He truly witnessed something beyond conventional understanding. Conspiracy extended beyond the church. All testimonies converge, the conspiracy extended far beyond Wilcox's small church. Influential families, local authorities, and members of other religious organizations were involved in or aware of the Brotherhood's activities. It wasn't isolated religious mania, concluded Margaret Thornfield. It was an organized system, protected by powerful people who considered psychological destruction and spiritual corruption acceptable prices for achieving communion with entities they didn't truly understand. Conspiracy remains unpunished, culprits escape justice. Our 2-year investigation revealed truths that shook not only our faith in humanity, but questioned the very foundations of American religious tradition. The Brotherhood of Celestial Communion operated a national network of churches under different denominational disguises, potentially victimizing hundreds. Reverend Ezekiel Wilcox never faced public trial. Asylum records show that he was institutionalized under a different name, his case files classified by direct governmental intervention. Some historians suggest that his continuous utterances were systematically recorded and studied by unnamed governmental departments. The industrial financiers escaped unscathed, using political influence to suppress investigations and destroy evidence. Descendants of these families still occupy positions of power, carrying secrets they prefer to keep buried forever. Reverend Wilcox, erased from official records. The existence of Reverend Wilcox was systematically eradicated from public memory, church records altered, newspaper accounts destroyed, death certificate issued despite the absence of a corpse. As if he had never existed, except in the Brotherhood's secret archives, where his transformation was reduced to clinical notes and disturbing photographs. During our investigation, we experienced inexplicable phenomena, electronic equipment malfunctioning in specific patterns, dreams filled with geometric shapes matching those described in Wilcox's journals, the persistent sensation of being observed by something that remained just beyond the periphery of vision. Coincidence or manifestation of entities that refuse to be forgotten. Location of ceremonies remains haunted. Today, where Wilcox's church once stood in Lawrence, remains only an empty lot, the building mysteriously destroyed by fire in 1891. Authorities discourage visitation citing unstable ground, but local residents report inexplicable sensations, words whispered in unknown languages, the impression of wings momentarily visible at sunset, electronic devices capturing sounds that linguistic experts classify as impossible to produce through human vocalization. Professor Edmund Crowe theorizes, the ceremonies may have created something beyond theological understanding. Repeated rituals performed at locations of specific geometric and astronomical significance perhaps produced a thinning of the barriers between dimensions, a doorway that remains partially open despite the physical structure's destruction. Secret memorial established. We have established a private memorial for Wilcox and other victims, a simple stone marker hidden at the perimeter of the former church grounds, where we regularly leave offerings not as worship but as warning. Our gesture of acknowledgement for a tragedy that official history refuses to recognize. Archives like this are systematically suppressed. If this content does not receive massive engagement, you will never see similar revelations about historical theological conspiracies. Your interaction determines whether we continue exposing secrets that powerful people prefer buried. Like, share, comment, or these archives will disappear forever into digital oblivion.